Um,
Dad wanted to one time keep that house for our permanent.
okay, go ahead, Ma. Tell me about when you were born and where
You
you were
want to
born.
tell me?
Yeah,
I should tell you where
yeah,
I was
yeah.
born.
Tell me your life story, starting with you
I
being
was
born.
born in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my grandparents lived. At that time, Harlem was pretty high class. And there was a hospital there, Beth David Hospital. And so my mother had a friend who worked there. So I was born there. It wasn't that far from where we lived in the Bronx. But my brother Artie loved the story because Harlem was for black people, and I was dark, and he was light.
Mm-hmm.
So he told the story that they gave Mom this baby, and she was black, and you know how Mom is, she loves everybody. So she took her, and now she's my sister. He
Uh-huh.
was delightful.
You didn't get along that well with Artie.
But no, I mean, there was a big contrast because my dad was blonde and blue eyes, very fair, and my mother was dark.
Where was your dad's family from?
And my father's name was Light, and I realized later on, years later, that my mother's name was Brown.
Mm-hmm.
So she had brown hair and brown eyes, and he had blonde hair and blue eyes. And my brother looked like my father.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I looked like the Brown family. Uh, Anyhow, I wasn't neglected. My mother had this very close friend. Their name was Zabbits. He was in the blouse business, and the two couples were quite friendly. And the two ladies were very handy. They used to make silk lampshades and all this kind of stuff. And we lived side by side in the Bronx, and she had just an only child who was Muriel, and she was dark too. And they were trying to match up Artie and Muriel. Anyhow, um, then years later, we moved to Brooklyn because my grandparents moved to Brooklyn.
Your mother's parents, your father's parents.
Oh, my mother's. My father's parents never got to this family. They never got out of Russia, Lithuania.
How did your father get
That
on?
that deaf girl that you met, my father brought her to this country. He was 17, and he took this 2-year-old because her mother had died in childbirth. His older brother, William, was the father, and he left his little girl with his parents in order to come to America and escape the Russian army and find a wife. So when he settled in the Philadelphia area, and my father's life was very interesting. You know, if you retold it, because he came, cold steerage in a big boat with this little girl. And he used to tell the stories that when he came to this country, they called him a greenhorn because he couldn't speak the language. And but he was pretty smart. He came here and he went to school in this country. And he took all the science course and everything. He wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't afford it. He didn't have the funds. But he worked in Philadelphia near my uncle, I guess. My uncle eventually had a men's haberdashery store. And everyone liked my Uncle William. He was a very friendly man. So my father then met my mother at some family gathering or something. And they got married while he was in the service. And eventually he owned a department store in a small town in Pennsylvania. And he was in the 5th class or something, not to be drafted, because he didn't have good eyesight. He wore glasses. But in a small town, they took him anyhow in the service. And he was in the medical corps. And his job, they sent him overseas. And his job was picking up the bodies on the...
This is World War One.
Huh?
This is World War One.
In battlefield.
Yeah, say that it was World War One.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
World War One. He was in the last transport over. And so my mother was pregnant. We were good at that with my brother Artie. And she sold everything in that store and moved to New York to live with her family. Well, her family consisted of 5 boys and 3 girls. They all lived, 8 children. And she was next to the oldest, next to my Aunt Fanny. And she had that baby, and he was brought up in my grandmother's house. And I guess he wasn't, maybe he was almost 2 years old when my father came home. So meantime, he lives with all these uncles who, I guess, they must have been spoiling him good, and he was very smart. My Uncle Arthur used to take him down, so the story goes, take him down on Broadway and bet on him. Say, my nephew can guess the next 10 cars that come by, the make, the year, whatever. So, and my mother didn't have any other names to use except she didn't use those names. She had a brother Arthur and a brother Milton, and she named those kids anyhow. Then when my father came home, we moved to Brooklyn. My grandparents moved to Brooklyn. And anyhow, and my kid brother was born eventually. My mother was a sick lady.
What was she sick with?
Terrible. She had high blood pressure. And she only lived to 50. She had a stroke. That was it. She was a good mother, and she was a very good-natured lady. She used to have my father's nieces live with her. This Dorothy, the deaf one, she had won a scholarship to Gaudet College, I guess. She had a mastoid operation when she was maybe 12. And she lost her hearing. And she never got along with her stepmother and didn't really know it wasn't her mother. He had a few other children with his second wife.
So you were living with your grandparents and your mother until your father came home, and then you guys lived on your own or with your grandparents
Yeah.
again?
Then we went to live on our own.
And then what did your
My
dad...
father went into the children's dress business. He
Yeah,
used to travel on the road.
and then you were close with all your family and your uncles and everything?
We what?
You were close with your whole family? You were close with your uncles and all?
Yeah.
What did they used to call you?
Me?
Yeah.
What they used to call me.
Didn't you have a big
I
white
used to have
outfit?
these big white Angora hats that my mother made. Snowball. Snowball is what they called me.
Yeah. What happened when you were 3?
Actually, they took me to one of the Macy's first Thanksgiving Day parade.
How old were you?
3. And one of my uncle's friends lived in a house on the route, you know.
What happened when you were 3 years old? Didn't you go to the hospital?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me that story.
I had something with swollen glands. I used to,
Tonsillitis?
my mother would take me to this doctor and he would pierce it or something. And then I had a appendix, burst appendix, I guess. And so my uncles went to shul to pray for me. And here I am. I was 4.
Yeah. Didn't they all come to the hospital and make a big deal about you or something?
What's that?
Didn't you say they all came to the hospital and made a big deal about
I
you?
think they prayed for me, yeah.
Uh-huh. Then what happened?
I got better.
And then what happened after 4
Then we
years
moved
old?
again. We moved a few times. We moved to a place where you lived on Union Street. And then we lived on Crown Street. And eventually, well, we lived in an apartment building on the same street with my grandmother. We lived in the corner on Montgomery and Brooklyn Avenue at 658 Montgomery Street.
Yeah. So then what happened with you in school and who were your friends?
Oh, I
when you
went
were
to
young?
PS 161. I used to walk to school with the landlady's daughter. They lived in the building too. That was my first friend, Mimi. And anyhow, then eventually we bought our own house. My mother didn't live to enjoy it too long.
Where was the house you bought?
Went to high school, went to Erasmus Hall High School. Used to pass Ebbets Field to get there. And that's where I met Renee Joseph at high school.
How old were you?
Oh, I was 13, 14. She lived with her father and her grandmother at the time, and the grandmother's family. She was very close to them.
And how did you do in high school?
What's that?
How did you do in high school?
I did well. That's how I got into Hunter. Otherwise,
Tell that story.
I wouldn't have gone to college.
Tell the story about your high school.
Well, I told Julie when we went looking at schools, I said, you know, Julie, I didn't look at schools. I just went to the mailbox and waited for that letter. And once I got accepted at Hunter, that was it. That's where I was going.
What did
And
you
I met, I made a lot of friends there, and I had a good education, and I met Gladys and Bunny.
What did you study at Hunter?
Hunter? I did okay at Hunter.
What did you study?
Oh, business, which at the time was okay, but that's obsolete now.
So
And then I went to Columbia
why? How did that happen?
because I graduated from Hunter and got a job right away, and I worked for a patent attorney on Fifth Avenue, and I hated it. It was too routine. So I was complaining to my father. I said, "Oh, it's boring." He said, "Go to graduate school. You can get in, and I can afford it." It was like $5 a credit at the time. So I did. Went to Columbia, and I took my master's, and I had a part-time job there. And then I met him. I did pass the teacher's exam in New York, which was only given very infrequently. But I passed it, and I had a job subbing, which was lucky at the time. And that's the job I left when we got married.
Mm-hmm.
And in Boston, you couldn't teach if you were married
Why?
because that was the law. 1948, that was the law.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't teach anyhow because I was pregnant.
And who did you did you date much before you met Dad?
Yeah, I did, yeah. But I fell for him. And I spent that summer with Gladys. They invited me at their summer place. They were very nice to me. And she was engaged at the same time. And they went to Bermuda for their honeymoon, so that's why we did.
So then what
And they
happened?
had a rough time.
And tell me about your older brother and what he did.
Oh, well, he tried to get into med school. It was hard to get into med school. So he went to dental school in Manhattan. He went to NYU. I used to drive in with his friends and my grandfather and my father. And eventually he got into medical school. And he was pretty smart.
Well, didn't he go to the University of Chicago when he was young?
No.
Where did Artie go to school?
NYU.
Oh, really?
He couldn't get into a city school. He was very smart, but he went to parochial school, which
He went
is
to a Christian school?
Hebrew English.
Oh, okay.
And he went in for sports. He was Mr. Chubby, but he didn't like it. And anyhow, he got a job at a camp that my grandfather was a director at in Edgemere, Long Island. And he slimmed down. He got to be pretty good looking. And he went to NYU. And it was those grades who helped him get in to medical school.
Where did he go to medical school?
Chicago.
University of Chicago?
I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
I think it was Chicago Medical School.
Uh-huh.
And he used to type up all his notes and sell them, for spending money and that kind of stuff.
And then what about Joe?
Joe,
Yeah.
he was very smart. He was a genius.
Smarter than Artie?
Well, there was 10 years between them. We were all smart. But when he was a little kid, he was so smart that he used to hang around with me all the time, and because it was 6 years between us. And he would memorize all the poems that I had to memorize. And I would take him to school Christmas time, and he would recite them, you know, and the teachers would go crazy. And he was gorgeous, big black eyes, and he was a beautiful little boy and full of hell. And I practically brought him up when he was little.
How come? Because your mom wasn't there?
No, she wasn't well.
Uh-huh.
She had high blood pressure. She used to get terrible headaches. And so I can remember the neighbors, and we lived in this apartment building, saying, boy, she had lucky have that kid. She takes care of him. Anyhow, he was always very smart in school, and he did get into Roosevelt College in Chicago. I don't know if it still exists, but he went there. He almost graduated. I don't think he ever really graduated, but he lived near Artie, and Artie kind of looked after him. That's Artie was taken into the service, and, you know, it was those war years. My mother got sick. She was bedridden, and she died.
How old were you when your mother started getting sick?
Oh, I was in college.
Oh, when your mother started getting sick?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, when my mother died, I was like 20.
And when she started getting sick, how old were you?
Yeah, in the teens. She'd go back and forth to Mount Sinai Hospital. And she was partially paralyzed. And we had a nurse at home. In those years, you could get, and she was very good. She took very good care of my mother. And people would, my father was quite popular, you know, with his customers and whatever. And everybody would give him advice. And he'd say to them, when I need your advice, I'll ask for it. Said, take your daughter out of school and let her watch your wife. He said no. He wouldn't do that. He was very nice to me. So I even got an allowance. My uncles were not very nice to him.
Why?
Well, they took my father into the business, into this, it was a ladies' house coat business on Madison Avenue, 105 Madison Avenue. And they were kind of fresh. You know, Christmas time, they give him a crying towel. I remember those. He would be so hurt. And then my grandparents were elderly, younger than we are, a lot younger, and they go to Florida for the winter. And my grandfather did another will and included my father. He was supposed to be made a partner. The will was never found. So my mother was sick over it. It didn't do her blood pressure any good. She wouldn't say anything to them. It was sad. I remember what went on because I was grown. So they were always nice to me. I had no problem with it. I wasn't going to argue.
And then what happened after you got married?
Then my father remarried.
Uh-huh.
She was a bitch on wheels. Very wealthy woman. And he came up to visit us. And he opened a bank account at Pilgrim Trust Company. You remember that, honey?
Yep.
And then he had a visa to go to Israel because Israel had just become a country and independent, and he was not a religious man, but he was an ardent Zionist. He knew what it meant to need your own land. They're still fighting for it. So, anyhow, he had a visa to Israel, and he died moving out on his wife.
Now he was going to move out on his wife and go to Israel
Yep.
because he didn't like living with her?
And my cousin Uriel was helping him, which was very sad. That's Joris's brother. He's gone now. But they all loved my father. Anyhow, she was nasty to think that he would move out on her. She was a very wealthy woman who really appreciated him in his intelligence, but she wasn't his type particularly.
What do you mean his intelligence? Did he read a lot or what did he do?
Did he what?
Read a lot or what did he do that showed his intelligence?
Did he what?
Did he read a lot? What you say his
Yeah,
intelligence?
he read a lot. He did. He was very well read. He read Hebrew books. He read English books.
What languages did he speak?
English and Russian. Yes. His brother went back to Russia and tried to get his sister and her family out. They weren't anxious to leave. They were scientists. They were a bright family. That was in the late 1930s.
They were scientists in Russia. What were they doing? Their name was Light?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And was their name Light when they were in Russia? Or there was a
I
different
think
name?
so.
Yeah.
Licht.
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 L-I-C-H-T.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's Russian
And
for light.
you know, there's a whole family. Yeah, they were probably wiped out. Who knows?
Yeah. But you don't know
But
what
they
part
were
of,
persecuted.
you don't know what part of Russia.
Well, they were all cousins that probably have records of it.
Yeah.
There were two nieces from two brothers of my brothers who lived with us. One was this Dorothy, and one was married from our house. Ira, beautiful blonde, natural blonde. Really, she was beautiful, and she was a model.
From Russia.
And so,
yeah.
women's hats.
Yeah. And who was from Lithuania?
The part of Russia that my father was from became Lithuania.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, he brought his niece over here. He never went back. But his brother went to try to get people, whoever he could.
Do you know what city was in Lithuania? Which city?
Live where?
The city? Do you know what city in Lithuania?
No. I don't know now. But
Yeah. Well, tell me more about your family and your mother's family and Uncle Arthur and the different things that happened.
Arthur went into the artist material business.
Uh-huh.
And they told him that if he'd take Milton, who was the youngest brother, if he'd take him in with him, they would give him space in their loft. They had a loft, and because they had this business that my mother put them in because she worked for what they called a cloak and suit house. Just suits and coats. And so that's how that artist material started. I think he really went to work for somebody and copied him. And he was a big investor. He used to invest in the market, and if he'd lose, his brothers would help him. They were close at one time. Then Arthur died about the time you graduated from college. And then the company, they had a big place they started on Long Island, and they had a big warehouse out there. So this artist material store kind of expanded, and Warren and Benji, his brother, those were Milton's sons, went into the business, ran the business with their wives, I guess. And Benji stepped out of there a while ago, and he told me he was sorry he didn't do it before. Apparently they weren't getting along too well, the two brothers. They have split up, and Lily, Milton's widow, remarried a very nice man who had never married, and he was a very well-to-do man. And I think he had an interest in El Al, didn't he, honey? I don't know, he used to travel back and forth a lot. Very nice man. We met them when we were in Florida. So they were friendly with, well, Lily's son, I don't know if you heard, was in a terrible accident, and he became a paraplegic.
But he's still been very successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's bright, and he's got a good sense of humor.
So everyone in the family, it sounds like almost everyone in the family was very, very smart, huh? Most people?
They were, including Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where his brains went.
Yeah. Well, he's a little crazy.
And
anything about your family, about your kids being born, or trips that you and your
about
husband
who?
went on? You know, you have children. Anything about your children or the houses you lived in or anything like that that's interesting?
I can think of, well, we love that one house. And Julie's very happy at her house, and Jane's happy with her house. And they seem to be doing all right.
Okay. Anything else you want to say?
Know that I've had a good life. I have no regrets. I married the man I wanted. And I think you kids have a lot of respect for us. That's what we've shown.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that you're always friends.
Mm-hmm.
After we're gone, that you still acknowledge one another, because I was not very happy with my brother Artie. He was very bright, but you know, I was no dummy. And he never actually acknowledged me. As a matter of fact, my girlfriend Minna hates him.
Mm-hmm.
He always thought that he was superior to us. He was nice to Milton. Maybe if he'd liked Milton's wife, he might have been nice. Milton had 3 nice boys, and he had such a bitch of a life, just miserable.
Yeah.
Whether he was in an accident that caused it, I don't know, but he had a wonderful potential. And he was kind and good-natured and good-looking and sweet. Where's Jane sometimes? She spent some time with him in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He was very nice person. And now, if they called tomorrow and said he died, it'd be no loss.
Yeah.
Because I would go for a number of years. I'd go out. I had nothing to do with Daddy. It was he and me.
Yeah.
And when I really got to meet Dale, and we got to be friends, she was a very nice person.
Yeah.
So some of her being aloof, I blame on her husband.
Yeah.
But whatever. In later years, maybe he was.
Well, is there anything that happened when you were kids that drove you and Artie apart? Can you think of any?
Well, the one son is very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I met him when my brother was sick.
Yeah.
I was out there. He's a very nice person. Teddy.
Yeah.
He's a hand surgeon.
Yeah.
And he has 2 daughters. There's nobody to carry on the name.
Yeah.
I think he regretted that. He worshipped his father.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was born, they had another son. Their first child was handicapped. And he died as a youngster. So there were 2 girls, and I did try being friendly. Amy used to come to the house a lot when she lived in Boston with her husband. And Donna.
Richard Lang.
Huh?
Richard Lang.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got also a couple of very bright boys and a girl who went to all the best schools.
What about her sister? Did her sister have kids?
Amy has a little girl.
No, her sister. Amy has a sister.
Yeah, Donna.
Yeah. Did she have kids?
She has one daughter.
Does she still live in New York?
Not New York. It's not part of New York City. I think it's considered the island.
Yeah.
I have the address. But I started getting friendly with her, and then I sent her gifts for the little girl and some handmade things and a couple of things for my mother. And she was a little bit snooty. She's a school teacher. Maybe she was too busy.
Yeah.
But Dale said to me, "Oh, Cheryl, don't pay attention to Donna. That's the way she is."
Yeah.
Donna Donovan, her name is.
Uh-huh. So she's not Jewish.
So I'm glad she's married.
Uh-huh.
And I don't bother anymore.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, our life here
Oh, okay.
is completely different.
Well, hold on a second. I gotta put the mic. You can go.
When we lived in Medford, we had a lot of friends. We had a lot of get-togethers and a lot of parties at different houses, but just about all of them are gone. But here, living here in Linden Ponds, we've made new friends. It filled in the spare time that we would have nothing else to do. So here they have activities. You can get involved in anything you like from what they present, and they're all friendly here. And we do have a specific group of friends that we have dinner with on occasion, and
So one of them has a birthday tonight.
and we're invited to their birthday parties, and so it's been a much more fulfilling life here than if we were back in the house, just the 2 of us. We'd sit around with not too much to do. Here we get to do things, play cards, and Mom was taking lessons and doing sewing and knitting, and so we get to express ourselves much more here, which helps because it's not nice to be alone but fortunately we have each other. But you like to have more than that. You like to have other friends. So I get to play poker, which isn't much of a money game, but it's a friendly game. So you get to see fellows and talk to things about them. And because of Renee, we met all these other women who are widows, and they like to be friendly. And that's so.
But Julie said, Mom, not too friendly.
So
She
it's worked
said,
out. It's
Just
worked out
watch
better.
out for him. They
Yeah.
like him.
Yeah.
It's worked out well.
He still blushes.
Anything else? Okay.